Hi, I'm Katie and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Francis Crick Institute in London. Where did your passion for science come from? Did you always know that you wanted to go into research? I think I've known I wanted to do science of some sort from a fairly young age. It was always the subject I found most interesting in school, along with history maybe, but the science won in the end. And if I think about it a bit more, science and history actually have quite a lot in common. They're both telling a story based on facts, and you might interpret these facts differently, but the evidence is always at the heart of the story. So maybe I just like stories. But I don't think I actually knew I wanted to do research and a PhD until in my third year of undergrad when I did my research project. And I think being in a lab and doing academic research is something you don't know if you're going to enjoy or not until you actually try it out for yourself. And my dad was also, or still is, a scientist. So I think seeing him enjoying his work when I was younger, well, enjoying it most of the time, influenced my decision to go into research as well. What is it like working at the Francis Crick Institute? So I really like working at the Francis Crick Institute. I think it's a very collaborative environment to work in, which I think is a good research environment to work in. And everyone's very willing to help each other out and share expertise, which I also really like. And we have a lot of seminars, so a lot of internal speakers, but also external speakers, and they're often world-leading scientists. And even if these aren't directly related to your research, I think it's good to go to these things and learn something new about science, even if it's not directly related to your project. And the building is also very nice and very conveniently located in London. From your experience at the Crick Institute, what qualities or research directions do leading UK labs look for in potential postdocs? So for me, I think the most obvious thing is that you have research experience that's relevant to the position you're applying for. As a postdoc, group leaders are often expecting you to be able to jump into projects a lot more rapidly than perhaps a PhD student. And it really helps to be able to pick things up quickly. So if you already have a background, this is going to be a lot easier. And along the same lines, I think being adaptable, willing to learn, and able to work independently and independently drive your own research are all very important qualities. And the Francis Crick Institute really values people that are collaborative and open-minded, which I think is important for all postdoc or research roles in general. What strategies would you recommend for early career researchers aiming to secure postdoctoral positions in scientific fields? So I would say the best thing to do is to use your network. So I know a lot of people have got their postdoc positions through people they've either met at conferences or from people who are collaborators of their PhD supervisor. So reach out to your supervisor for your PhD and see if they know anyone advertising postdoc, or you could just reach out to these people directly. Are there any alternative routes to becoming a research scientist other than by doing a PhD? If yes, what are the alternative routes and what do they entail? Absolutely yes. If you want to work in academia, research technician or research lab assistant roles typically do not have a PhD. And depending on the position, you will likely have your own research project to work on. But at the same time, you will be helping out other lab members and doing general lab things like preparing reagents for the whole lab. So while you still get to work in the lab, you might not have as much independence and freedom to explore your own research ideas that PhD students or postdocs have. And obviously, if you don't have a PhD, you can't become a principal investigator. So that's something to bear in mind, that the progression might not be as high. But if you know you want to work in a lab, but you're not necessarily sure that you want to work in academia, there are plenty of roles in industry that don't require a PhD. Or there's biomedical science roles, such as working to process patient samples in hospitals that don't require a PhD. What's the difference between postdoc, research associate, and a research fellow? So your day-to-day in each of these roles would likely be very similar. The main difference for a research fellow is that they will have a fellowship, which means they likely secured funding to research their own ideas. And this is seen as more of a stepping stone between being a postdoc under a principal investigator and then running your own lab and being independent in your research. So it's more common for you to have a few postdoc or research associate roles straight out after a PhD before getting a fellowship. And during the time that you're a postdoc, you will be working under a principal investigator or a group leader. Do postdoc research positions allow for teaching opportunities, or is a lecture position a more suitable choice? So since the Francis Crick Institute is not a university, we don't usually have undergraduate students here. But we are able to do teaching through teaching modules on programs at our partner universities, such as UCL and King's. And it's common for postdoc positions to have some teaching involved in what you do, but how much you're expected to do as part of your role varies from place to place. And it is possible to do a role where you have part teaching, part lecturing, and part research. So it really just depends on what you want to spend most of your time doing. What are the biggest challenges that you face that you never expected to be an obstacle? I think one of the biggest challenges is balancing all the things that you want to do during your postdoc. So the experiment and science always comes first, but at the stage of your career, you really want to be building your personal brand and your CV. So things like attending conferences, organizing conferences, networking, doing training to build your skills, or doing public engagement really take away some of your time, and it's hard to balance this, I think. And I also think that I found the overlap between PhD and postdoc harder than I expected. So I guess this would only be for postdocs in certain situations. But for me, I started my postdoc after I submitted my PhD thesis, but before my viva. So I still had some part of my brain thinking about my PhD and preparing for my viva, and I was also finishing off a paper based on my PhD work. But at the same time, I was starting a new project and getting to grips with some of the background and the biology behind my project, which was quite different to my PhD work. So I think I found it challenging splitting my brain in two different, completely different projects while I was still finishing off my PhD and starting my postdoc. Can you tell me some more about your research? So my current work focuses on using single molecule super resolution microscopy to investigate epidermal growth factor receptor dimerization and oligomerization in lung cancer. So epidermal growth factor receptors are a type of membrane protein, and they act to pass signals across the cell membrane. And this allows the cell to change in response to these specific signals or messages. And in lung cancer and many other types of cancers, these receptors are often altered either by mutation, so changing the DNA sequence, or by upregulating the receptor. So you have a lot more of these receptors and a lot more active receptors in cancer compared to healthy cells. And as the name growth factor might suggest, this results in excessive cell division, which is a key hallmark of cancer. So we hope that our research will allow us to understand how specific mutations in these receptors, how this affects how the receptor works, and how it changes how well specific drugs targeting lung cancer work. And this will hopefully allow us to choose the best treatment options for different patient groups with these different mutations in lung cancer patients. And this specific microscopy approach that I'm using really allows us to see the precise detail of the complexes that this receptor is in. And we know that the type of receptor that it's in can change how the receptor works. and uncovering how this changes with different receptor mutations will be really important for helping us understand this further. What are the real-world applications of your research? So because of the industry collaborations I have with my project, it's quite easy for me to see how my work could directly impact patients. So we hope that my work would help us to determine best treatment options for different patient groups that have specific mutations in the receptors that I study in lung cancer. And I really like this aspect of my current project, that you can really easily see the direct link to how this could impact patients' lives. As I think sometimes with life science research, especially basic science research, you can feel a little far removed from directly helping people in the real world. But with my project, you can really see how this could directly help patients. What does a typical day look like for you? So I do a lot of cell culture in my work, which means most days the first thing I do is check on my cells and make sure they're looking healthy and see how fast they're growing. If they're starting to get a bit crowded, I will split the cells, which basically means taking a small amount of these cells and transferring it to a new flask with media with all the things that it needs to grow in. And as I mentioned previously, I also do a lot of microscopy. So I'll often be on the microscope for a couple of hours or analysing my data from a previous microscopy session. I also go to at least one seminar or lecture a week, and I have regular meetings with both my supervisor, my lab, and also my collaborators in industry. What is your favourite aspect of being a researcher? So I always say that the reason I wanted to do a PhD and the main reason why I stayed in research is because I love to learn. And when you're a researcher and you're working in a lab, you are really learning something new every day, whether it's learning something from a colleague from a seminar that someone's given, or it's learning a new protocol in the lab, or learning something new from a paper you've read, or finding out something completely new from your experiments. You're always learning, and I think this makes it hard to find research boring, which is something I really wanted from a job and from a career. What do you wish you had known before starting your postdoc? So I think I would say that you don't have to know everything. So while it's true that your group leader might expect you to be able to pick up things a little quicker than maybe a PhD student, I think you need to remember that a postdoc is still a learning experience and a training experience, so you don't need to know everything, especially if the project is different to your PhD project. It's going to take you a while to learn things. To find a job in research or to get career advice, go to jobs.ac.uk.